As France eases out of lockdown, people are heading back to their old ways of life, except everything feels so unfamiliar.
Well, the places are the same, but whether it's wearing a mask or avoiding a kiss hello, the way we're supposed to navigate everyday life is just different.
What long-term effects are the coronavirus and the almost 2-month lockdown going to have on France and French society?
Join us for this episode of French Connections Plus, where we take a look at the new normal in France.
Cafe culture is an integral part of life here in France, particularly in Paris.
And during the lockdown, tens of thousands of cafes, bars, and restaurants were forced to shut down like other businesses, essentially grinding life to a halt and quieting the very soul of the capital.
But on June 2nd, bars, cafes, and restaurants began slowly opening up once again, bringing new energy to the once deserted streets of Paris.
After being cooped up in their apartment for months, Parisians were eager to savor more than just a café en terrasse. They rejoiced in a return to some sort of normalcy.
Restaurant, cafe, and bar owners were thrilled as well, as their industry took a particularly hard hit during the lockdown.
To find out more about how French cafes and restaurants are getting back on their feet after the nearly 2-month lockdown, I went to meet up with Josh Fontaine. He owns and manages several restaurants in Paris, including the Mattie Celeste in the trendy 3rd arrondissement.
Tell us, what was confinement like for you?
Confinement was not too calm for me. The first days were a little bit hectic because nobody knew what was happening. Nobody knew how long we were going to be shut down for. After all of that was kind of settled, it's just waiting and then trying to strategize how we're going to reopen and what interim things we could do to bring cash into the company.
Did this create any new opportunities for you?
Yeah, I would say so. You know, at Mattie Celeste, we put together kind of a selection of wines that we were selling on the street as like a caviste, a wine shop. Something that we definitely found worked well was cocktails to go, so pre-mixed cocktails. That went quite well, and we're looking to kind of expand that into a permanent line that we sell here and in the future in shops around France.
There are all sorts of security measures that you've had to put in place. Can you kind of walk us through that?
The staff having to wear gloves and wear masks, and us having to think of ways to manage customer flow both inside and outside when people need to use the restroom and things like that is quite difficult.
And there's a thing about distance between tables.
Yeah, a meter between tables, and we're trying to respect that, but also reassure the guests that the place is hygienic and safe and they're not in any risk to come here.
Do you think that the restaurant industry in general is going to be able to survive these kind of health measures if it ends up lasting a long time?
From what we've seen so far, people are itching to come out, which is good, and I think the support with the chômage partiel that the government gave to not only restaurant industry but all industries.
So that's part-time unemployment.
Yeah, part-time unemployment was helpful because not only did it preserve the employment, but it also kept some money in people's pockets, so people are not totally, destitute coming out of this, and they have some money to spend and they can come out and support the local businesses. The thing that we're worried about is when the unemployment stops for restaurants, which is end of September, which is obviously a lot of support and more than a lot of countries have done. If we don't have yet 100% of our customers back, which is obviously in a large part tourists, because Paris is the most touristed city in the world, how that will play out when we have 100% of our costs, but we don't have 100% of our revenue.
And you were mentioning all this help from the state. Do you think you've been satisfied?
I think nobody can ever be 100% satisfied, but seeing what friends are going through in the US or in the UK, I think that France has been pretty supportive compared to what other countries have been. Nothing's perfect, but yeah, we're pretty happy with it.
What's interesting about cafes and restaurants, though, is it's a place where people socialize. People were locked up for a really long time. What kind of reactions have you been hearing from your clients as they come back?
I think people are just happy to hang out with their friends and not be in their small apartments anymore. Apartments here are I would say, considerably smaller on the average than other big cities, especially in Europe. So, yeah, they're just happy to be out, and they're happy to come back and have their favorite drink and a glass of wine and just be outside and around other people.
Do you think that the restaurant industry is going to be able to pull out? And if so, when do you think things will kind of go back to normal?
Yeah, I think we'll be able to pull out. There definitely will be some restaurants that aren't able to reopen or not able to reopen under the same guise as before. But I don't think coronavirus will kill the entire restaurant and hotel industry worldwide. I think that people are, social creatures, and they need to be out and sharing. So we'll come back.
I hope you're right. Well, thank you so much, Josh. Thanks for being on the show.
You're welcome.
As the lockdown made its way through March, then April, then May, more and more people here in France started to wonder, what is this going to mean for my summer vacation?
Les grandes vacances certainly are sacred here in France, and as a rule, about 3/4 of French people tend to stay in France for their summer vacation, but this year they could be joined by the 9 million more who tend to go abroad.
Now this, of course, is great news for France's tourism sector that was badly hit by the lockdown, but bad news for vacationers who could be facing less space at public beaches and pools, all because of new security measures.
Tourism experts expect that all this means that more people will be heading towards France's mountains and countryside. After being locked up for such a long time, a lot of people want some fresh air.
Fortunately, not everybody in France goes on summer vacation at the same time.
July and August are months reserved for long vacations in France, and there are two schools of thought here. There are those who go away during the month of July, and they're called les juilletistes. And then you have people who go away during the month of August, and they're called les Haussiens. These rival groups cross paths on one fateful weekend, which becomes a chaotic traffic dance known as le chassé-croisé. During the summer, parts of France virtually shut down. People joke that August is the best time to visit Paris because all the Parisians are out of town, and the capital becomes kind of a ghost town, similar to what happened during the coronavirus lockdown. This year, given the health crisis and subsequent economic woes, France's summer holidays are going to be different. Several French companies in the vacation business are offering vouchers and significant discounts for healthcare workers, supermarket cashiers, cleaners, and the other frontline workers who proved so vital during the coronavirus crisis. They're calling the initiative Le Repos des Héros, holidays for heroes.
There's an expression here in France that goes simple comme bonjour, simple as saying hello, but things have gotten a lot more complicated these days.
Well, the traditional way of saying hello and goodbye in France is with a kiss, or rather several kisses, which is debatable how many you do, but this is called la bise. And with health and hygiene on everyone's minds, a lot of people wonder if the French might just kiss la bise goodbye.
Now, interestingly, this isn't the first time la bise has gone out of fashion due to a health crisis. It was already an established tradition as far back as the 14th century, but it was almost wiped out completely due to the plague.
It didn't make a comeback until hundreds of years later. This was after World War I.
The big question now is, what kind of effect will this current plague have on la bise? And French social media has gone crazy coming up with some possible alternatives.
What will la bise look like in the future? Well, I teamed up with France 24's business editor Stephen Carroll to explore some options.
La bise and social distancing don't go hand in hand, especially when authorities recommend staying at least 1 meter apart from each other. So what alternatives are there? Perhaps an elbow bise, or a foot bise, or hand signs, or how about a good old high five? Oh wait, no, that won't work. Coronavirus certainly has had an impact on French society and customs, begging the question, will the French wave goodbye to la bise?
Coronavirus is certainly going to have a long-term impact on French society. It's already transformed the French language.
There's a whole new vocabulary that popped up in the wake of the pandemic. Take, for example, the word apéru.
Apéru is the combination between the words apéro, France's cherished pre-dinner drinks, and rue, the word for street. That's because before bars and restaurants were allowed to officially reopen, many of them were actually selling food and drinks to go, which essentially brought the apéro to the streets.
Even before that, during the strictest part of the lockdown, people, including us, Flo, were holding what we call Skype-a-rows, virtual happy hours that were held on platforms like Skype or Zoom or House Party.
Now, all this lingo was virtually unknown just a couple of months ago, and now it's part of everyday life. Expressions like la distanciation sociale, social distancing, confinement, lockdown, déconfinement, the end of lockdown, the list is long.
And while there's still so much we don't know about the virus, one thing's for sure, in French at least, COVID-19 is feminine.
When you're talking about Covid-19 in French, you use the article la Covid-19, not le. Now, it's actually the official guard dog of the French language, the Académie Française, that decided this.
And while it might be la Covid-19, it's le coronavirus, probably because virus in French is masculine.
Well, it wouldn't be French if it wasn't complicated. Now, that's all the time we have for today's show. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out on social media.
And we will see you next time for a new edition of French Connections Plus.
Bye, Genie.
Bye, Flo.